Welcome to the Supreme Court.
The people who know me best know that I have a serious affection. No, that's not strong enough. Obsession with the Supreme Court. So while I was in town with some honors students for the Regional Honors Conference, I took a couple of students to the Supreme Court and asked them to help me film some of my favorite memories of time spent at the court. What you're about to watch is part of the video that we shot on a cold but beautiful April day in 2018.
This building, so wonderful. I'm going to tell you the stories of when I have come here to go inside the courtroom and hear oral arguments. The first time I came here, I was a college junior, and I was taking honors constitutional law class and was required to come to oral arguments at the Supreme Court before the end of the semester. So like all of you would do, I waited until the dead last day that I could come and still make it in. So I had to get in. And if you look around, you'll see that on a normal day, there's not that many people here. But people on argument days start lining up, sometimes as early as 6 or 7 a.m. for a case hearing that starts at 10 a.m. And you can usually start going in at 9:30 to get ready to go in the courtroom. So I got here at 7 because that's what you do. It was a cold April morning, very much like this one. And I was also told by my colleagues in the class that if you brought any stuff with you, like a bag or a coat, you would have to check it in a coin locker because you can't take anything into the courtroom with you. So I brought nothing. This was in a day before cell phones. I had no cell phone. I had like 4 sweatshirts on and 2 layers of pants, and I had money in my back pocket for the metro, which I took from Union Station over there, and nothing to read and nothing to do. And I got here at 7 a.m. and stood on the marble for 2.5 hours. I was not the first person in line, though. I was the second. The guy in front of me was a new attorney who had just been hired for the Patent and Trademark Office. And so one of the cases they were hearing that morning was a patent and trademark case, and he was so fired up about it. Now, I had just shown up. Like, I didn't know anything about what the court was hearing that day. So through the course of the next 2.5 hours, he told me all about this case and what the importance of it was and why I should care. And the line, continued to form behind us. And eventually, around 9:15 or 9:30, the guards, who are out here now, you can see, they came and got us, and they walked us up these stairs through those doors. The people who had stuff, like idiots, had to put it all in their coin lockers, and then we went into the courtroom.
As we were brought into the courtroom, you would think that they would begin filing in the guests into the pews that you see there behind the golden gate separating the spectators from the actual attorneys and the court. But that's where you would be wrong. No, they began filling in the guest seating section from the back. But to be perfectly honest, I got into the courtroom, and even though I had to sit on these super tiny chairs, me, a person who is not exactly tiny, and as I sat there worried that the chair was going to break beneath me, at least I got into the courtroom and I was able to hear oral argument, even if it was from the very back of the room. Now, there were really 2 things that I noticed while I was at the court on this first visit. The first was that one of the only justices who I knew by name, Clarence Thomas, really appeared to be doing some seriously deep thinking while he was listening to the arguments in the case. He would close his eyes and lean back in his chair by which I mean he fell asleep, but in a totally dignified way. And I thought, what is he doing? Doesn't he know he has a job? The other thing I noticed while I was there on that first visit was some of the antics by the justice who would become my favorite Supreme Court justice for the rest of his life. And that man was Antonin Scalia.
So at my very first visit to the Supreme Court, I didn't really pay attention to much of what was going on because it was all like way up here. But the one thing that stood out to me was this man, Antonin Scalia. So Scalia, political scientists have studied the transcripts of Supreme Court oral arguments and have found that he is the justice in history who got the most laughs from the audience. And when I came the first time, he definitely earned that reputation. I remember the second case that day was a case about international trade of some sort. And he asked one of the attorneys, well, let's just imagine that your son wants to take my daughter out on a date. And I decide that I don't like that. And I'm going to take a baseball bat and bash in your son's knees. What would your legal arguments say are remedies available to me in a trade case? And the lawyer was clearly a little taken aback and said, well, Justice Scalia, I'm not really sure. But if I can return to my other point, and that was pretty much the end of that. So that's Scalia. And Scalia continues to be one of my favorite Supreme Court justices. May he rest in peace.
It really is the case that Scalia was the funniest justice. In fact, a study by a law professor at Brown University found that he got more laughs from the audience than any other justice by almost a factor of 2. So Scalia, great guy. The next time I came to the Supreme Court was the Monday after the rally to restore sanity and or fear that was held by Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert in 2010. I had taken Monday off from work and came up to the Capitol to see the rally. It was my first ever rally, and I stayed until Monday to go to the Supreme Court. Now, being there for the rally to restore sanity and or fear was really cool. I had never been to a big scale rally before. But what I didn't anticipate was the fact that other people might show up. And I know that sounds kind of naive. But the thing is, I hate crowds. I feel very claustrophobic in crowds. And because I hadn't really anticipated that literally thousands of people would show up on this day, I rolled onto the mall around an hour before it started, which meant that I was way, way, way far away from the stage. In fact, if you can find the last white tent, which were the first aid tents, I was about 20 feet farther back from that. And I was surrounded by people who did all manner of crazy things. So the only thing we can be grateful for is that I was there by myself, because I saw people get separated right in front of me. Regardless, it was an energetic time, an interesting experience. I saw some really cool signs. But the next morning, Monday, that was on Saturday, I spent a day kind of visiting friends. And then on Monday morning, I got up and went to the Supreme Court. Now, I had learned my lesson on the last trip, because if you got there too early, then you ended up in the tiny rickety chair at the back. So I was going to be smart.
Since that first trip here, I've been back twice. And each time I have learned that the line of people getting into the court will give you the knowledge that you need in order to have a successful day at the court. So my second trip, I got here on a Monday morning, and based on my last experience, I decided that I didn't need to be here like the first person in line. So I got here around 8, and I was number 53 in line. because the new system under Chief Justice John Roberts is when you show up, you get a card with a number. So you can like go to the bathroom, get some coffee, go inside and, you know, get something to eat, and then come back and you have a place in line, which is great. But, you know, so 53 or so is right where I wanted to be. And in front of me in line, number 51 was this, number 50 was this really, really tall guy in a red plaid shirt and overalls from Alaska. And he was like super excited. He had been here for a week. He was flying out that night, but he wanted to go into the Supreme Court. He was just like really cool guy, really tall, like very, very tall. And then number 51 and 52 was this daddy-daughter duo. So this girl was clearly like taking a morning off from her high school, or she was probably like 14. And the dad was clearly an attorney. And the girl had printed out the briefs for the two cases we were going to hear that morning. So she was standing here just like we're standing here. And she would say a sentence or two from the brief, and then her dad would say, okay, so what does that mean? And she would explain it back to him in a way that made it clear that she understood what these cases were about at 14. And this was great because I didn't know anything, so I'm like, I'm just gonna listen to them. And then I was behind them. So about 9 o'clock they came out, and you're not allowed to walk up the steps anymore. As you can see, there's a sign that says go around the corner. This is a John Roberts innovation for security. So about 9 o'clock they came out and they started taking people 10 at a time around the door. And once they got about 45, 48, let's call it 49 people in there, they came out and said, I'm sorry folks, but the courtroom is full. And so, you know, Alaskan lumberjack, daddy-daughter Liz, are like, what? We've been here for an hour, standing in the cold, on the hard marble, and we can't go in. So, like, you can stay in line, and if anyone leaves after the first case, we'll let you go in, or you can hop over here to the 3-minute line and just jump in the back for 3 minutes during the court case. It was at this point that the young girl really showed her inability to regulate her emotions. Because she just kind of started wailing. Like, it was, you know, like on Peanuts where when one of the characters cries and the tears are like flying off their face, it was kind of like that. And she said, Daddy, I took a day off of school and I can't, what are we gonna do? And I was like, yes, 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 yes. And, you know, her dad's like, calm down. And I think everyone in the line was like, you give it to him, like, yell. And he was like, it's going to be okay. We'll get into the second case. And she did eventually calm down. But I was right there with her, right? Because I wasn't going to make a scene, but I was like, you just tell him. So we stayed in line, because obviously we're like, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're not leaving. We stay in line for another hour. And about 11 o'clock, as we get closer to 11, she starts agitating again, like, when are they going to come get us? Why aren't they coming to get us? Like, we should be going in, we should be going through security. Like, why aren't they coming to get us? It's 11:05, it's 11:10, no one's coming to get us. Like, she's starting to wail a little again, and the tears are coming, and about 11:15, they came out around the corner, and they pointed at the first 10 of us, and they were like, you 10, go! And so we ran around the corner, went through security, went upstairs to the coin-operated lockers, threw our stuff in the coin-operated lockers, and got to go in for the last 40 minutes or so of that case.
As they let us into the courtroom, the thing that I was worried most about was, am I going to get to see anything? But as soon as they brought us into the courtroom and started pointing us out seats to sit in, I had a sinking feeling in the bottom of my stomach as they led me, once again, to one of the tiny rickety chairs. I'm not kidding. The thing I noticed at this particular oral argument was Sam Alito, one of the more recent additions to the court. Sam Alito was, by way of seniority, in the same position at this hearing that Clarence Thomas had been in my first visit to the court. So he was sitting in the same position on the bench, the same seat. Well, not literally the same seat because they keep their chairs, but in the same position. And what I noticed about Sam is that he too, like Clarence Thomas at my previous visit, felt the need to really think deeply about the case before him. In very much the same way, with his eyes closed, really focusing, except his falling asleep is a little less sophisticated than Clarence Thomas had been before him. True story.
The final time that I came to the Supreme Court, the most recent one, was in 2011 or so, 2012 maybe. And the new procedure here is that when you show up, you get a card number, but you can go inside and have a seat at the cafeteria, and you rendezvous at a place inside. And we'll talk more about that when we go inside.
At this point, my Crackerjack film crew and I headed inside to record the rest of my third visit story. But just as we were setting up the final shot, one of the Supreme Court police officers came over and said, "Hey there, you need to stop." And I was like, why? Because I had read the policy, and the policy for recording at the court said that you cannot record or take pictures in the courtroom. But it said nothing about the building, and in fact, 2 other security officers had told us that it was fine to film in the first floor of the building. So I was asked to talk to the Public Information Office, who said, "No, you may not film in this building whatsoever." And after a fairly tense exchange, on her part anyway, not mine, I was made to understand that this was not going to happen. And I was like, well, that's okay, because we can still take pictures. So that's what we did. Back to our story. So when I came to the court for the third time, I was there on a day that they were hearing a case in which a lot of states had sued the EPA over some sort of regulation. And the guy I was standing behind in line just outside the cafeteria when it was time for us to line up was one of the attorneys who had worked on this case in one of the state courts, but he wasn't the one who would be arguing before the court that day. So once again, the line delivered, and this man was able to tell me all of the things about the case. He brought the case knowledge. I brought knowledge of the justices. So as we're standing in line, we're sort of chatting, and I'm telling him about how much I love the court, how much I love the justices, and how awesome it is to be here, and he's telling me about the case and his experiences, how he's never been to the court before, and he tried to call to get a reserved seat, but wasn't able to do so, and I certainly understood. And as we're standing there, out of the corner of my eye, I notice that Justice Breyer walks by and goes in the exit of the cafeteria. I kind of freak out, and I was like, "Dude, did you see? Justice Breyer just went in." And he was like, sure, whatever. He was not as excited as I was, but I was coming unglued. Eventually, they took us up to the courtroom, and you may think I'm joking, but I swear I'm not. Once again, the courtroom was full when we got there, and I got to sit in the teeny tiny chair. We were crammed in there like sardines because all of the attorneys from all of the cases in the lower courts had come to hear this first case. And so, with much sadness, I sat myself down in that tiny chair and listened to the first case, which went on for about an hour and a half. And then the justices decided to take a break, and the lawyers who were there for the first case fled the room en masse. They were gone. And I looked around and realized there aren't many of us left in this room. So I knew that I couldn't just get up and move. But pretty soon, one of the female security guards came over and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like to move closer to the bench? And I said, would I? Yes. So I moved up to about the third row away from the gate. And let me tell you, people, it was like all of the best things in my life all happened at once. I was alive in that moment. My life could have ended when I walked out of that courtroom. And I wouldn't have been terribly sad because I was sitting there mere feet away from the justices. It was the culmination of all of the hopes and dreams I had had every time I had been to the court. It was magical. And the next hour went by almost in a blur that was just rosy on the edges and one of the best experiences of my life. So those are my stories. Thank you for joining me through this perhaps slightly long telling of why I love the Supreme Court and all of the ways that the court has provided me with amusing stories, perhaps, experiences that are unforgettable, and ultimately one of the greatest moments of my life.
This is the Supreme Court.